Okay, so today what we're going to do is we are going to deal with shading our mask and then most likely going down to our neck. What's probably going to follow this on our next class spell is going to be shading our hair and then addressing any cast shadows that are, sorry, let me get that focused, that our hair is putting onto our face. There will be a day we'll attack the ears, so we'll deal with shading the ears too at some point in the next couple class periods. But remember that this is actually a demonstration that I've worked on a long time ago, so there are some things on here that are already done that we haven't discussed yet. And I've got this piece of tracing paper that's just very simply placed on top of my original drawing, just so that way I can kind of get this demo done a little bit quicker. But this is an old demo that I did. I'm just simply working on top of that with a piece of tracing paper. All right, so, and I need to sharpen my pencils. So what you guys need to do is you just need to make sure you have all your pencils. You need your 4H, you need your 3B, you need your 6B, you're going to need your pink eraser, and then if you have a regular pencil eraser, I do think that always is really handy to have, just because some of these areas that we're working in are going to be kind of tight. So having something, a smaller eraser like this is very helpful. And then you also need your kneaded eraser too in case you need to lighten anything. Before I get started, I'm going to actually sharpen up my pencils here, and then we will get started. All right, one more thing that you need also too to make sure that you have is that scrap piece of white paper that we're using to kind of sand down our edge to get a nice shading edge, but also too this paper does double duty as it protects your drawing from your drawing arm so that you're not wiping away all your hard work with your drawing hand. So make sure you have that white piece of paper just protecting your project. All right, so as far as your mask goes, okay, so what I would do right now is I would go ahead and erase back over top of your drawing any part of your nose and mouth and chin that you have drawn on. Now you'll still see it on there, but we're going to kind of approach this the same way we did our eyes, in the sense that we want to erase over our original drawing first, just enough that we can still see it, but then it's not going to, scream out loud or show up after we're done shading it. So go through, now I'm using my pink eraser. I'm also going to go ahead and erase my guidelines that I no longer need. I've got a lot of guidelines that I drew on top of my drawing. So just spend some time erasing over the drawing first. I'm also going to do the same thing for the nose. Again, you're still going to see those guidelines and the drawing for the nose is just going to be a lot lighter. Okay, so the first thing I would do, after you get this all kind of erased over, the first thing I would do is I would draw any details on your mask that you do not have on at this point. Now my particular mask, and I'll show you what my mask looks like when it's off. I brought an extra one. I have a print or pattern on my mask, so I'm going to draw that actually first before I start shading. I'm only going to try to get it on half of this. I'm not going to waste your guys' time in watching me put this pattern on the entire mask. But if you are like me and have like a design on your mask, you'll need to do that first before you start shading it. For me, I have like these little kind of flowers. And so I'm just going to kind of generalize the shapes that I see because the pattern itself, these little flowers, are so small it's really hard to see a lot of detail on them. Like I would have to actually bring this really close to my eyes to see it. So, but when I look at myself in the mirror, it's actually, it just kind of looks like to me like little kind of dots almost with, you know, like the leaves here at the bottom. So I'm just going to draw these very lightly with my pencil first. And when I do this, I'm not going to be so concerned with making them look like they are evenly spaced out. And they're actually not. They would be if the fabric was laying flat. So if the fabric was laying really flat, it would be. But because the fabric has been sewn together to the contours of my face, they are not. So I'm going to see some areas where the pattern is really close. Like there's one shape next to another, very close to each other, and then other times it's going to look like it's farther away. So I'm going to just kind of plug that in. If you have a pattern, now would be the time for you to do that too. And again, because my face is far away from me in the mirror, I can't see a lot of details on this pattern, and so that's what I'm going to pay attention to. If I were to bring more information to this area than what I can see, then it wouldn't be a very authentic drawing. Let's see. I don't know that I could even get half of this done. Might take too long. Let's see. And if you're like me and have a pattern where all the shapes are kind of the same, kind of get into a rhythm, and it makes it easy to kind of just go for it. Maybe you have stripes, maybe you have like a tie-dyed look to it. Everybody's going to be a little different. Okay, I don't know how much I'm going to do here. All right, so I'm going to just stop right there just so that I don't take up too much of your guys' time. So what we're going to do next is we're going to start just kind of blocking in the shadows. So again, if you are one of those people that has the gray charcoal paper, you guys are going to be using that white charcoal for all the areas that need to be lighter than your paper. For those of you who have white paper like me, we're leaving those areas alone, at least the lightest. We're going to leave our paper alone for the lightest area, which is going to be white. And those of you that have the gray paper, you're going to need to actually shade those in. So just like when we shaded our eyes, I'm going to go ahead and move this so we can kind of cover it up right now. So just like when we shaded the eyes, we looked at the shapes that the shadows make. You want to do the same thing for fabric. So fabric is no different really than shading on your face. It's just a different type of surface. So you want to pay attention to the shapes that you see and then the values that are plugged inside of those shapes. That's what's really going to bring out the form. So if you have like kind of like a silky looking or shiny mask, you might see more defined shapes. If you have like a cloth mask, you're probably going to see maybe some shapes that are a little bit smoother looking. If you have a paper mask, again, you might see a lot of really defined shapes. So if you want to, You could first start by kind of outlining the shapes and the shadow, or the shapes that the shadows make on your mask. For me, because my mask is cloth, I don't see those sharp shapes like somebody who would have a shiny mask or a paper mask on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of start, and I'm going to start up here around the nose because my mask is kind of broken up in sections. If you're a person that has a paper mask, or maybe you have pleats and folds in your mask, you could just actually attack one kind of fold or pleat at a time. All right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead, and I still have my 4H pencil in my hand. I'm going to kind of get that edge sanded down so I have a nice edge to shade with. It takes a little longer with the 4H pencils just because they're 4H. And I'm just going to go ahead and just start by mapping out these values. And again, I'm just going to start in one section. Kind of helps me focus in that one particular area. And I'm actually doing this right on top of my pattern. So I'm not skipping over my pattern when I'm shading this. I'm actually shading it right on top of those little flower shapes that I drew on there. The reason why is because the shadow doesn't skip over a pattern. So it's not going to hop over and miss it. It's going to go right on top of it. Now, the other thing you want to remember is that for every form change, there should be a value change. So that's something we discussed as early on, like on the watercolor project. That's something that we did then. So if you guys remember when we painted the pots that the plants were sitting in, for every time that pot kind of turned or we looked at one side versus the other, we had to make sure that those two values were different. So it's the same thing with this mask. So right here, my mask is on the side of my nose, and I can see that this whole area is darker, and then I can see it starts to lighten up a little bit as it comes up over top of my nose, and most likely it's because my nose is forcing my mask to kind of pop out and catch the light. So for every, and again, I'm going to say this again, for every form change, there needs to be a value change. So every time that form underneath the mask changes, you're going to see a difference in the shadows and the shapes that they make. So I'm just going through my pencils here. My mask is actually pretty dark in color also too. Actually, the base color of this is black. So that's something I have to consider. And then make sure that the outline also too of your mask is, has been lightened up too. I didn't go over mine. You need to lighten this whole thing up. So make sure if you didn't lighten up your edges of your mask, do that too. I'm just going to kind of, again, work on half of this. Okay. So what I'm looking for is just a really nice start on this. Again, looking at the shapes the shadows are making on the mask. So I'm just kind of working on this area to the side of my nose, and then I'll work on the nose once I get this kind of started in a good place. And I'm just going to keep moving through my pencils as I see fit. Looking at all these little details. I have, like, since my mother-in-law made these masks for my family and I, she hand sewed these. She's got this seam, which kind of creates like a crease or a bump in the fabric. So I'm going to make sure that I include that also too. And I wouldn't call it necessarily a sharp and defined line. It's kind of fuzzy. So I'm going to pay attention to that detail also too. Once you have that kind of started, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I don't know, yeah, I think I am going to go and start working on the top of my nose. So I'm just going to kind of start over here on the, yeah, I think that'll work out. I'm going to work on the left and work my way over to the right. Now what I've noticed is that as this mask of mine hops on to the very top surface of my nose, it does lighten up. Now, believe it or not, I can still see my pattern underneath here. It might not show up so well on the video, but I can still see it. And remember, if you by any chance if you get a little too dark or maybe too dark with your drawing, you can always use that kneaded eraser to go back in and lighten it up. Kind of zoom in here. So I'm just starting this nose area with my 4H again. Just working on this top area. And see, that helps me see what I might need to fix here on this other side. Which I can see already, and you need to kind of darken up over here to make that hump kind of stand out. There we go. Get the seam.
Pardon the interruption. At this time, the track members that are on that list for today only should be leaving at this time. Thank you.
Okay, so I've kind of got the area on top of my nose established, so I'm going to just I'll keep going over here to the right. Now my light's coming from the right side, so this will be the lighter side of my mask. So again, I'm going to start with my 4H. Again, my mask, the base color of my fabric is actually black. So I know that everything's going to at least have a layer of 4H on it. I need to lighten up my drawing again. So it's important to know where your light's coming from. Is your light coming from the right? Is it coming from the left? That's definitely going to have an effect on the values of your project. Remember also too, that for every form change there should be a value change. So once I get that going, now I can work on finding some of these shapes that I see on this side. If you haven't picked up on it already, I say probably the word shape probably about every 5 minutes. Shape is so important on this particular project when you're talking about shading. And I think that might surprise a lot of people. Not people who do this, but for people who have done this for the first time. So you're looking at those shapes that the shadows are making. Those shapes exist because it's hitting your face and this piece of fabric with the particular lighting that you have. Now, just because this is the lightest part of my mask doesn't mean I'm not going to have black on it. I am, just probably not as much as I would on the darkest side. I'm just getting a little too dark in some of these areas, so I'm just going to use my kneaded eraser to kind of pick up a little bit. Great way to fix stuff. So what I would do when you do this mask is just kind of go section for section. Work in one area, get a good start on it. And then move on to something different, then you can always come back and fix it up. I'm going to go in and kind of work on my pattern that I have here and bring out back parts that can't see. Spend a little time doing this. Now, for those of you that do have a pattern on there, you will notice that in those areas where your shadows are really dark, it's going to be hard for you to see any part of your pattern. That would be normal. And I am going through and kind of popping out these shapes just a little bit more with my kneaded eraser. I need it to be really small, so I'm just kind of pinching the kneaded eraser and kind of going in there and tapping on top there to get those shapes to kind of pop back out. So I'm going to walk around and see how you guys are doing. Then I'll come back to this, but I think you guys get the idea of how to start this. Alright, so I've got this top section done. I'm just going to kind of tidy up a little bit of it, lighten up this side. Just a tiny bit. And maybe go back in and darken it back up. We'll see. But there's that. It's enough that I think it's a good enough start that I could move on to other areas. Now, your straps that you guys have, so everybody's got straps that wrap around your ears. You can go ahead and deal with those now or later, just up to you. It might not be a bad idea for you guys to maybe even not deal with those right now, for those of you who don't have your hair styled the way that you drew it, because as you can see in my drawing, I had my hair down. I don't have my hair down today. So like my hair would definitely be putting quite a lot of shadows, especially on my mask on this side of my face. Whereas this side, my hair is behind my ear, it would kind of show up a little bit more and a little bit brighter. But as that strap goes behind your ear, you'll likely see, and again there's always exceptions because we're all different and the light's hitting us, but it is likely that you might see it get a little bit darker. It's going to get darker as it goes towards your ear and behind it, because again, as it goes farther back here around your ear, it's going to get a shadow over it because you have your hair and it's getting tucked behind your ear and all that kind of stuff. So those areas might be, especially again back here towards your ear, a little bit darker. Always exceptions to the rules. Alright, so I'm going to just kind of keep working on this side. I'm going to try something different on my pattern and kind of shade these in a little bit first. So we'll see here. I have these little leaves on my flowers. Again, those of you that are dealing with patterns, don't get discouraged. I know it's another little step you have to deal with, but when it's all said and done, it's going to look really impressive. People are going to be like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? So I'm going to try a different approach on this and see how it works. I'm going to shade these in kind of first. The flower buds themselves on my pattern is lighter, so I'm going to leave those alone. I think if I get the leaves shaded in, it might help me see them a little bit better when I do start shading this area. Again, those of you that are dealing with like pleats or, I guess pleats is or folds in your mask. Not sure the right way to explain that, but if you have pleats or folds in your mask, I think that actually makes it really easy that you can just kind of approach your shading just one kind of fold at a time or one section at a time. I think you'll be able to see the shapes that are in those folds that the shadows are making a little bit easier. Again, for every form change, there should be a value change. So these shapes that you see on your mask exist because it's over your face, and it's with your lighting. So really important to look at all of that stuff. Look at this seam here. And my mask is pretty dark, so I'm going to be using a lot of these darker pencils. Kind of getting this side of my mask established with a layer 4H, just to kind of start establishing that darker color that I have for my mask. Again, my mask base color is actually a black, and although I don't recommend ever wearing something really super dark when you are doing a project, a self-portrait project, or even if you're setting up a still life, I don't recommend including objects that are black or just a solid dark color. But for me, there was no way to avoid this. These are the masks that my beautiful mother-in-law made for us, and that is that. So now I'm just going through, I've got sort of a layer 4H established here. And I'm just looking at these shapes. Some are crisp, some are not. That's what I've got to pay attention to. Again, some of you have paper masks, some of you guys have fabric masks, some of you guys have like maybe a shiny material, so all of our shapes are going to look different. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely see on my mask where it goes over to the one side of my face, it gets a lot darker. I literally have like kind of a line that goes right down here that kind of divides my light side from my dark side. So it might be helpful if you guys think you've got something like that. Take a look at it. That might be a good landmark to kind of focus on. Getting stuff filled in here. Definitely see that my mask on my dark side is really, really super dark here on the outer edge. And that would make sense because it's wrapping towards the back of my face, wrapping around the side of my face. So just building this stuff up. And again, I'm just shading right on top of my pattern. So I'm working on top of those shapes that I had established. So some are going to be really hard to see, which makes sense because the shadow, the darker the shadow gets, the more it will cover what's under it. Just building up layers, trying to hold on to these shapes that I've got established. Finding some new shapes. Then you might notice in those areas where your mouth is and your nose that you're going to have some shapes around those forms. So pick those out, plug those in. So it's going to make it look like it's over top of your face. So for example, in this area where my nose is, I notice I kind of have like a triangular shape shadow right where the bottom of my nose would be. So I'm going to try to plug that in so I really can give that impression that my nose is underneath this fabric. And again, I'm always surprised when I'm working in one area, it helps me fix up other areas. So just going in and finding some things that I need to fix or pull out. All right. So I think I've got at least a fairly decent start on this. I think for me to be able to finish this, I would need to definitely do the other side, and I'm not going to include that on this video just because that would take a lot of time up. Of course, I can't stop working on this. So I'm going to stop right there, kind of show you that, and then I'll zoom out and see how that looks with sort of the rest of that. Okay. So the idea would be that I would move over to the other side. I've got this bottom section I would still need to do, which would need to, that in particular is actually really, really dark because it's under my chin. My light's coming from here, so it's a little lighter here, but for the most part it's pretty dark. So there's that. You can still see my pattern. It probably needs to be brought out a little bit more. Some areas kind of got covered up too much, and I can very easily go with a 6B pencil in those really dark areas and pop out that pattern more. But yeah, so that's all I'm going to show you guys of the mask, and I'm going to give you guys some time to work on this.